The Story of Sakai and Southerland. Saburo Sakai tumbled through 8,000 feet of Pacific sky, each second bringing him closer to certain death. Shards of cockpit glass were embedded deep in his face, and above him his parachute burned with orange flames that ate away at the silk. Blood obscured his vision. His right eye was gone, though he wouldn't know that with certainty until much later. Below, American Marines had already spotted him, their rifles tracking his descent with practiced precision. Through his one functioning eye, Sakai watched an American fighter banking toward his position. This was it, he thought. They would strafe him in his parachute, just as his own forces had done to enemy pilots over Pearl Harbor. He had no illusions about mercy in war. He closed his eye and waited for the bullets that would end his long career as Japan's most decorated ace. But the bullets never came. The day had begun like countless others over Guadalcanal. August 7th, 1942, marked the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific theater, and Saburo Sakai was precisely the kind of pilot American briefing officers warned their men about. With 64 confirmed kills, he was an ace whose Zero could dance circles around anything the Allies could put in the air. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Escort bombers to American positions, draw out their fighters, and engage. Sakai had done this 64 times before, but that morning, his inexperienced squadron leader made a decision that sent ice through Sakai's veins. Break formation and engage at will. In aerial combat, breaking formation was a death sentence. Sakai had watched eager young pilots peel off to chase individual kills, only to be torn apart by coordinated enemy attacks. He keyed his radio immediately, voice firm, negative, maintain formation. But 3 of his wingmen had already broken away, diving toward what appeared to be easy targets below. Sakai knew instantly it was a trap. American fighters never flew alone at that altitude. When he spotted the P-38 Lightnings emerging from the sun with beautiful tactical positioning, he tried desperately to warn his wingmen. The response came in the form of cannon fire that shattered his canopy and drove glass deep into his skull. Lieutenant James "Pug" Southerland saw the Zero spiral downward, trailing smoke like a dying comet. He watched the parachute deploy, damaged, burning in sections, and in that instant, he understood 3 fundamental truths. First, that Japanese pilot was dead the moment he touched ground. American Marines under fire didn't take prisoners. Second, circling to protect an enemy pilot was tactically suicidal. He was low on fuel, deep over hostile territory, and his squadron had already lost 2 planes that morning. Third, and most importantly, he was going to do it anyway. His wingman's voice crackled immediately over the radio. "Pug, what are you doing? Break off, that's an order." Southerland clicked his radio twice, acknowledgement without agreement, and nosed down toward the falling pilot. The decision was insane by every military standard. Guadalcanal in August 1942 wasn't secured territory. It was an active battlefield where trigger-happy troops shot at any parachute they saw. Circling made Southerland slow, predictable, and vulnerable to every Japanese gun position within 3 miles. His P-38 Lightning might be deadly in a dogfight, but at low altitude, circling slowly, it became a coffin with wings. His fuel situation made everything worse. He'd already burned through half his reserves in the morning's engagement. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Circle to protect this enemy pilot, and he'd run out of fuel over enemy territory. Southerland knew this. Every pilot knew this. He descended anyway. Sakai watched the American fighter drop altitude and felt confusion replace his certainty of death. Why wasn't the pilot shooting? Then understanding arrived, colder than the fear. The American was positioning for a close-range strafing run, wanting to ensure a clean kill. Sakai had done the same thing twice to American pilots over the Philippines, telling himself it was mercy, a quick death instead of slow starvation in the jungle. But at 300 yards, then 200, the expected muzzle flash never came. Instead, the American began circling in wide, slow arcs, keeping pace with Sakai's descent. Then Sakai saw the reason. Muzzle flashes from below, American ground troops firing upward, tracers arcing through the air and growing closer with each passing second. Every time the Marines fired, the American fighter would drop lower and bank across their line of fire. He wasn't shooting at Sakai, he was blocking for him, using his own aircraft as a shield between a Japanese pilot and American bullets. Sakai had witnessed 3 years of aerial combat. He'd seen men sacrifice themselves for wingmen, watched kamikaze pilots dive into carriers, experienced every variety of courage and madness that war could produce. He had never seen anything like this, an enemy pilot risking his life to protect him from his own forces. The radio chatter in Southerland's cockpit grew increasingly desperate. His squadron leader's voice cut through with unmistakable authority. "Southerland, that's a direct order. Break off now or face court-martial." Southerland didn't respond, simply maintained his protective circle around the falling Japanese pilot. His wingman, Richardson, still circling at 12,000 feet and burning his own precious fuel to provide cover, tried once more. His voice came quieter this time, almost pleading. "Pug, what are you doing, man?" Southerland finally spoke. 5 words that would define the rest of his life. "He's someone's son, Dave." At 3,000 feet, Sakai could distinguish individual Marines, could see their rifles aimed skyward. The American fighter dropped to 500 feet, low enough that the Marines had to hold fire or risk hitting their own aircraft. Then Sakai realized something that tightened his chest. The American wasn't just protecting him from ground fire. He was hurting him, using his plane's wake turbulence to push Sakai's parachute westward, toward the tree line, toward Japanese-held territory, toward safety. At 500 feet, Sakai could see the American pilot's face, young, perhaps 23, the same age Sakai had been when this war started. Their eyes met for just 1 second. The American nodded once, then pulled up hard, gaining altitude before Japanese ground positions could lock onto him. Sakai hit the ground 30 yards inside Japanese territory. The impact shattered his left ankle and drove glass fragments deeper into his skull. When Japanese soldiers reached him and started pulling him toward cover, Sakai grabbed one soldier's arm and pointed at the American fighter, now climbing through 2,000 feet. "Don't shoot," he said, his voice raw. "Don't shoot at that one." The soldier looked confused. "Commander, that's an American." "I know what he is, Sakai. Don't shoot." At Henderson Field, Southerland's P-38 rolled to a stop on fumes. The propeller stopped turning before he could taxi to the hangar. Commander Eldridge was waiting on the tarmac, face red with fury, and the debrief that followed lasted 40 minutes. Most of it Eldridge shouting about disobeyed orders, endangered wingmen, and wasted fuel protecting a Japanese ace who had probably killed a dozen American pilots. Southerland didn't argue or defend himself. He simply sat and absorbed the reprimand. When his wingman Richardson knocked and entered, standing beside Southerland at attention, Eldridge demanded an explanation. "Tell me why I shouldn't court-martial both of you." Richardson's response was simple. "Because, sir, if that had been me falling, I would want someone to do the same thing." After a long silence, Southerland looked up and asked his commanding officer a single question. "Would you have wanted someone to do that for your son, sir?" Eldridge's jaw worked silently. Finally, he ordered them both out of his office. There would be no court-martial, no official reprimand. The incident was never recorded in official records. Sakai's recovery was slow and painful. The infection in his empty eye socket nearly killed him, and the head wound gave him migraines for the rest of his life. But 3 months later, he was back in combat, adding 4 more kills to bring his total to 68. His squadron mates noticed something had changed. When American pilots bailed out, Sakai wouldn't pursue them to the ground, wouldn't strafe them in their parachutes. Let them land, he would say. Let them take their chances. When a wingman challenged him, "That's not how we fight, Commander." Sakai fixed him with a stare made more intense by his scarred, empty eye socket. "That's not how I fight anymore," he said. In 1985, in San Diego, California, two elderly men met at a veterans reunion. Saburo Sakai was 69 years old and had spent 43 years searching for the American pilot who saved him. Finding him hadn't been easy. The incident was never recorded. Southerland never talked about it, never filed a report, never even told his family. But Sakai was persistent, cross-referencing dates and locations, interviewing veterans, until he finally found a name in a reunion registry. James Pug Southerland, retired Navy, living in Virginia Beach. When Southerland's wife found him at the kitchen table with Sakai's letter, he was crying. "I'd started to think I imagined it," he told her. "Started to think maybe it didn't happen the way I remembered." At the reunion, Sakai brought his children and grandchildren, 3 generations that existed because of a choice made in 7 minutes over Guadalcanal. The two men sat across from each other in long silence. Finally, Sakai stood and bowed deeply. "You gave me my life back," he said. "I've spent 43 years trying to understand why." Southerland stood and extended his hand. They shook, long and firm. "You want the truth?" Southerland said. "I don't know if I can explain it. My commanding officer asked me the same thing, nearly court-martialed me over it." "What did you tell him?" "I asked him if he would want someone to do that for his son." Sakai's 12-year-old grandson, curious and confused, spoke up. "But Mr. Southerland, he was trying to kill you that morning. If he'd won that dogfight, you would be dead." Southerland looked at the boy, then at Sakai. "Yeah, but once he was in that parachute, he wasn't a combatant anymore. He was just a man falling out of the sky." James Southerland died in 2003, never having talked publicly about what he did over Guadalcanal. He never sought recognition, never thought of himself as a hero. "I just did what anybody would do," he told his wife once. "No," she replied, "that's what you would do. That's the difference." Saburo Sakai died in 2000, 3 years earlier, never having stopped telling the story of the American pilot who saved him. His grandson still has the letter Sakai wrote to Southerland, and the last line reads, "You taught me that honor doesn't end when the shooting starts. It is where it begins." Saburo Sakai expected death at 8,000 feet. James Southerland gave him 55 more years instead. That wasn't military doctrine. That wasn't even heroism in the traditional sense. That was simply what some men chose to do when faced with an impossible decision, the code that separated the warriors from the killers.